a project on behalf of the German Ministry. Just a second, could you show the next slide, Markus? Project funded by the Prevent Alliance on behalf of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. And as the title already suggests, we developed a guideline for organic waste treatment in East Africa. So the guideline part is coming in a minute. Yes, thank you, Markus. And already we, as the German Biomass Research Center, we are focused on everything bioenergy. So we partnered up with engineering offices, NGOs, and also Rodiek to represent the German waste treatment industry in this project. So we really have the specific expertise for the parts the guidelines then are presenting. The first guideline or the first report is already published. As you can see on the left side, the status quo report on organic waste collection and treatment in East Africa, specializing on Ethiopia or taking Ethiopia as an example. You can download it free of charge on the link giving or just scanning the QR code. And as I said earlier, the second part, the actual guideline on treatment concept, transport concepts, and so on, is getting its final polish at the moment and is hopefully later this month or early October then publicly available as well. And you might have seen on the last slide or know it from yesterday, it's a Prevent Waste Alliance project, so you can get engaged on the Prevent Hub as well and get in contact with us if you're interested. So basically, that's the introduction from my side. I didn't say anything about myself, but it's not really about myself today. I'm a working group leader at DBFZ at the German Biomass Research Center for Biogas Technology. And yeah, we are focusing more and more on waste treatment, also with our focus on bioenergy generation. So this project really was a good learning curve for us, as well as bringing in our expertise on sustainability, for instance, into the organic waste treatment concepts. So now for the first presentation of today is given by my dear colleague Markus Leonard, who studied environmental engineering at Bauhaus University in Weimar. You might know him from his pitch yesterday. And yeah, he specializes on resource management, especially in the international context and development policy context. And he already visited Cambodia and India himself. He's more or less on his way to Ethiopia now. And since August 2019, he's a research associate in the biochemical conversion department here at DBFZ in Leipzig. So, Markus, the word is yours.
Thank you, Marcel, for the kind introduction. So before we get into the baseline study, actually, we just decided that it could be interesting for you who you are talking to. As Marcel mentioned, we have a partnership with 6 partners, and we would like to give any of those partners a brief introduction round. So I will just start with the DBFZ and the Rodiek part, and Cifa will take later on, and also the other partners will just introduce themselves. So before getting in the baseline study, just so that you know, Marcel already told some basic stuff about the DBFZ. We are application-oriented research institute in all areas of the bioeconomy, and we're based in Leipzig, Germany. We have around 300 colleagues here at our site, and we are looking at everything that is going from anaerobic processes, bio-based products and fuels, smart biomass, heat, catalytic emission control, and also the systemic contribution of biomass. And the overall goal of actually our research is a carbon neutral bioeconomy based on renewable resources. So just for the background of us. Another partner that was conducting this baseline study with us was actually the German Rodiek partnership, the export network for the German waste management and recycling industry, which was founded in 2007, and is also since 2021 the strategic partner of the Ministry of the Environment. And what they are actually doing is linking politics, science, and economy, networking with the German waste and recycling industry in the promotion of cooperation and exchange of information. So the overall goal is raising awareness for sustainable waste management and so on. So you get an idea who you are talking to actually. So, but with further ado, we get into the facts actually regarding waste, organic waste in East Africa. So first of all, the amount of waste in general in East African countries is pretty low, less than 0.5 kilogram per capita a day. So compared to Germany, with around 3 times the amount of 1.5 kilograms, it's significantly lower. But as we expect, or as general scientists expect, we will see a tripling of the generation by the year 2050. In the sub-Saharan countries, so more or less everything beneath the sub-Sahara, so East Africa is just only a part of it, the capture rate is around 40 to 50%, so there's still a lot of space for improvement. The recycling rate is pretty low at around less than 5%, but what makes it very interesting is that we have to deal with mainly biological residues with a share of over 50%. When we now look more in detail in the East African countries, you see the global average is a little bit higher with around 0.7 kilograms per day in capita for the overall waste generation in the East African countries only. What is kind of interesting here is since Marcel already mentioned that we took Ethiopia as an example, here in this statistic, actually, Ethiopia has a very, very low waste generation with less than 0.2 kilograms per day compared to the other countries in East Africa. If we compare it here with the Seychelles, for example, with waste generation close to the Western countries with 1.6 kilograms per day. That's kind of interesting. So the reason for this is explicitly that in the Seychelles, we have a lot of tourism. We do have a lot of more accounting for the waste actually. And why the amount of waste is pretty low in Ethiopia is because of also some statistical issues. Since around 80% of the Ethiopian people living in rural countrysides, we usually expect a very low waste generation per capita. So this could also be a reason why this amount is pretty low, since there is no primary data available. But nevertheless, why we then chose Ethiopia if the waste generation per capita is that low is just because the amount of people in Ethiopia is that big, with around 120 million people living in Ethiopia. It's the second largest country after Nigeria on the African country. So the contribution of waste generation by country is pretty big and significant compared to the other East African countries here. So it's one of the 3 major producers actually of organic waste here. And if we compare it to the Seychelles right here at the bottom with less than 1%, so we can actually neglect what is happening on the island states there, but some country like Ethiopia is pretty relevant in this case. So what is also a driving factor is the long-term establishment of organic waste management systems. So since organic waste management systems usually take a lot of time, between 20 to 30 years to really establish in a country, Ethiopia is pretty interesting because of its demographic change. And this is something you can actually see here in this slide. We expect, as I mentioned, a tripling around of the amount of the waste that is produced. And we also see in Ethiopia that the demographic change says that we will see maybe a doubling of the population in Ethiopia within the next 30 years. And we also do have a large number of, or a large percentage actually, that tends to move from the countryside to the urban areas. So we have a high urbanization rate in this case. What it also makes it very interesting, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have a high share of organic waste, even if we compare it between the income sites actually, but either if we look more into detail in specific data, we actually have some data of different cities in East Africa that is pretty accurate. When we look at Addis Ababa, for example, we have a share of around 70% of organic waste, so really significant share that is highly interesting for organic waste management in this case. So going a little bit away from all the hard facts and numbers, actually, another very important part, sure, is legislation, regulation, incentives, in this case for organic waste management. So we have to look a little bit on the history of Ethiopian waste legislation and also what kind of implementation factors they actually have. So the overall, maybe first unwritten constitution would be the Fedane Gast, the law of the kings, so-called. And the first really written constitution would be then the Constitution of Ethiopia from 1931. The actual, which is still intact, is the Constitution of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia since 1995. Since then, at least in the case of waste legislation, we do have different laws and proclamations, etc., that actually tackle this topic. So we do have some sort of a foundation for at least legislation in the waste sector here. But another very important factor here are the Indices for Ethiopia. I don't want to go into detail about every little step here on the slide, but just to point out a few, maybe the ratification of the Kyoto Protocol in 2005, for example, then the Ethiopia Program of Adaptation from 2010, then the ratification of the Paris Agreement in 2007, and finally the National Adaptation Plan from 2017. Also the Ethiopia's 10-year development plan, which especially the National Adaptation Plan makes very interesting in terms of organic waste management, is that there the Ethiopian government have actually claimed that they actually need a lot of more organic fertilizer within this country, since especially the agricultural sector is one of the most important of the country. So as I mentioned, around 80% of the people living on the countryside and working in the agricultural sector. And the agricultural sector makes up around 40% of the overall GDP of the country. So it's a really important factor within this country. And the fact that I actually state that organic fertilizer would be a much better option than chemical fertilizer makes it very interesting, especially for organic waste management. But also in this national adaptation plan, there was some reasons why actually organic fertilizer isn't that state of the art in Ethiopia stated out. So one of the most important reasons would then be that chemical fertilizer was supported over a very long time and is very easy to handle. And even the agricultural sector is not promoting the implementing of or the application of organic fertilizer on the agriculture areas. So this is one of the driving factors why it isn't still in this year 2022 not an important factor, organic fertilizer in Ethiopia. Nevertheless, Ethiopia has also shown some successes within the field of waste management in general. So if we would try to put it into different phases, we definitely can say that it highly depends on the region you're looking at. So we still have extensive uncontrolled dumping in some areas, but we also do have reliable collection and better landfill sites in different parts of cities especially, and we do have separate collection and sorting in different parts of cities. So for example, we do have the first the waste-to-energy plant in Africa, the REPI waste-to-energy plant in Addis Ababa, for example. We do have some sort of different waste collection vehicles and sorting, especially in different kinds of others. And we do have, for example, the National Biogas Program from SNB. This is which is implemented since 2008 and has installed over 20,000 domestic biodigesters all over the country. So there are really some relevant successes so far in Ethiopia. But when you're thinking about developing a guideline on how to establish actually something like organic waste management or develop it further than it is right now, we do have to think a little bit out of the box and find different solutions for different places. So Ethiopia is a very diverse country. As I mentioned, 80% is still living on the rural areas, but we do have a mega city like Addis Ababa, for example, that is kind of unique within this country. And some specialities would then also be that the median age is just below 20 years. So we have a very young population within this country. And we see the strong demographic changes. As I mentioned, a doubling of the population until 2015 is expected, as also an urbanization rate of around 5%. So people want to leave the countryside and go to the cities. This is one thing we actually have to consider when planning out logistic concepts and treatment facilities. Another important factor, as I mentioned, is the agricultural industry within the country. So, as I mentioned, 80% of the total population is working within the agricultural industry, and it contributes around 40% to the GDP of the country. What is highly interesting is also that the government called out 17 agri-industrial growth corridors, so-called, where they will focus on different agricultural products, for example, which also can give us an opportunity to establish especially pilot projects with pure waste streams in the organic waste management sector, and also contribute to the development of the country in this case. So when we're talking about organic waste, we usually think about about the municipal waste streams we do have. This is especially very important in the urban areas as Addis Ababa or Ababa or anything else that is happening in Ethiopia. But we do also have some other relevant biomasses or organic residues that we can actually look at. For example, the coffee processing waste, since Ethiopia is the 5th largest coffee producer in the world, actually, and the largest coffee producer in Africa. So we there have a lot of unused residues actually that could be used, for example, for biogas feedstock. We do have a lot of animal manure, since the livestock of Ethiopia is the largest in Africa. And we do have some invasive aquatic weed plants like water hyacinth, for example, that actually do have some issues in Ethiopia and do make problems for people actually. For example, here, water hyacinths already cover around 40,000 hectares of Lake Tana, and but have a huge potential for especially methane production. And we also do have something like abattoir waste, since due to the large livestock, we also do have a lot of meat production and leather production, for example. So there are other waste streams that also can be considered if you want to establish a business model there. So what we've learned so far? So organic waste in Ethiopia, especially in other East African countries, is still and currently an environmental and public health risk, especially. We have large quantities that are still poorly managed, and these quantities continue to rise due to the demographic changes. But we also see that we have many efforts from government side or from the development agencies that have already been made, and showcase examples have been established. So we do have the opportunity to organize a waste management system involving the local businesses, since there are a lot actually doing what they actually want to do. So organic waste sector is nothing completely new, but still has to get on his feet, so to say. We see that small-scale solutions seem to be more successful than large-scale plants, but we also have to consider that the scales are very different in megacities like Addis Ababa. And we see that the municipal waste management in rural areas should definitely integrate agro-processing industries. So that's it for the start, and I will give back to Marcel. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Markus. That's proper time management. I didn't had to interrupt you. Yes, thank you for your interesting presentation. Just for the audience, if you have any questions left or if you want to get involved, please use the chat function of the Teams meeting. And later on, we are going to have the opportunity to have a discussion, which is after the next presentation. There's room for discussion, and then also at the end of the session there's going to be a broader discussion if you like. So please save your questions for now, either make a note or write your questions into the chat function of this meeting. Now for our next presentation we have Muluken Antene Haile Mariam, who holds an MBA degree, is, as he says about himself, environmentally concerned individual, and today is representing Cifa Onlus or Cifa Onlus. He's going to introduce the company in a minute. He's a graduate from Havasa University, working on different projects already, especially on sustainable and circular economy. So giving workshops himself, giving trainings himself on plastic disposal, recycling mechanisms, and also solid waste management and environmental sustainability. I think he's more than the right person today to talk us through 3 case studies Cifa Onlus observed in Ethiopia. So yeah, Muluken, it's your turn.
Hello.
I think now it's better.
All right. I am Muluken and I will be presenting to you the case study of the organic waste management in Ethiopia in the case of the 3 cities. But before directly going to the cases, I have to say something about Cifa, which is an international NGO. What's and the Cifa operating in Ethiopia formally since 2004. Basically, Cifa's engagement in Ethiopia is in areas which are migration and environment. So
Yes, your sound is not coming through properly. It was good in the meantime.
Okay. Is it good?
No, it's still.
Maybe just try to do it without headset. That went before very good.
Okay. Or maybe even turn off the camera. Sometimes that helps.
Okay, I'm using another computer, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's better.
That's good now.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, turning the camera off, as Angelina said, might help as well, but we can hear you now properly.
All right. All right. Okay, so Cifa is operating in Ethiopia since 2004 in basically 2 thematic areas, migration and environment. So directly going to the case studies have been studied on 3 cities of Ethiopia, the capital Addis Ababa, Hawassa, and Gidole. Next slide, please. Okay, the case of Addis Ababa. As you can see, the Addis Ababa is the largest city in Ethiopia, and it is the capital of Ethiopia, occupying over 5 million inhabitants inside. Next. So the solid waste management in Addis Ababa is characterized. Can you hear me? Okay, the solid waste management agency organizes the entire waste collection and promotes the integration of private sectors and unions, which collect door-to-door waste from institutes and households. In 2017, there were 6 private companies that operate in Addis Ababa, and more than 521 medium and small enterprises collecting waste from household institutes and commercial areas. The waste type, next slide. So, the waste type and source of generation is presented here, which is more organics. Over 60% of the waste collected from Addis is organic, and 15% is recyclable, which are not organic, and 25% of the waste from Addis are not recyclable and could not be identified as organic or inorganic. Composition of the waste by generation is most of the waste is generated from institutions, commercials, factories, and households by the unions by collecting the waste from door to door. The street sweeping constitutes about 6% of waste source. Next slide, please. Okay, the financial aspect. This financial aspect is basically how the community pay bill for the solid waste management service provided by the municipality. So every household who access a clean water service pay 20% of the water bill for solid waste management service provided by the waste management agency of the municipality, and commercial institutes pay 42.5% of their total water bill, and the people who commonly use water taps pay 5% of their water bill for solid waste management service provided by the waste management agency. Next. So the waste segregation, the municipal waste generation rate and characterization study report revealed that about 68% of waste generated are mainly organic. The segregation at household level is actually foreseen by Ethiopia's solid waste management proclamation. According to a RANAS study, one of the problems for citizens who would like to separate organic waste from the rest is lack of space where they locate the segregation bins. Next slide. It has been reported about 60,000 up to 65,000 tons of plastic waste have been recycled every year in Addis Ababa. Next. So generally, the gaps identified as the gaps of the solid waste management system in Addis Ababa are here. Some of them are no business plans or cost-benefit analysis of the unions in the enterprise. The government do not provide any equipment and appropriate work environment, market linkage, even the lack of skilled personnel and no control over workers' health and safety are some of the problems in Addis. Next slide. When we get to the Hawassa is also the capital of the South region, and it has more than 400,000 inhabitants. This make the city an important trade and touristic center, which attracts around 200,000 visitors every year. Next. The solid waste management of the Hawassa city is have some somehow problematic, and the existing dump site is totally inadequate. That's the first problem. In 2 points. The first is the capacity of the dumping site, and the second one is it resides in the living areas. In Hawassa, there are 6 associations which take care of the collection and the transportation of waste up to the dumping site, the landfill site. In Hawassa, there is no tax system to cover the cost of the waste collection service. Therefore, the system is based on, the private agreement upon the client and the service provider, who is the municipal. Next. Next slide. Generally, the organic. Next slide, please. Next. Okay. No, before this. Yes, the municipality of the Hawassa city has no any platform that could purchase compost from the compost producing associations currently. At the moment, the associations are quitting the production of the compost. So the main problem of the association of Hawassa in production of compost are the quality of the product and the access to market, to supply for the greenery and even the farm practice in and around Hawassa. Next. The case of Gidole. In Gidole is the town that's located in South Regional State, which is more than 500 kilometers south of Addis Ababa. It consists around 140 inhabitants, which is much more less than Hawassa and Addis Ababa. So the town contains less than around 140,000 inhabitants. So the community practice basically agroforestry and with animal integration. Agricultural products are sold mainly in local markets and big markets nearby. Next slide. The waste management is not felt as an issue in the community, even in the administration of the Gidole town. So it is estimated, it's just rough estimate that 80% of the generated waste is organic, which is followed by plastic and a very small percentage of paper. There is no formal collection and transport system organized by either by local authorities or even by any private unions or any private companies. The most common way to get rid of the waste is just open burning, which is not advisable. And valuable things destined to no longer be used, such as broken hard plastic containers or used garments, are recovered by a recycler and collector. This is actually just Gidole town and only some in neighboring districts. And next. Next slide, please. Waste recovery in Gidole, as I have said before, the only way to get rid of the waste is burning and dumping irregularly. So this is the most backward practice, which has been there for a long time and still continue to be implemented. Next slide. So generally, after looking the three cases, we can summarize as the lack of policy and legal framework and law enforcement, lack of supporting guidelines, lack of skilled human resource infrastructure constraint, and low public awareness highly puts the implementation of the solid waste management practice at risk. And thank you so much for the time.
Yes, thank you very much, Mulung. Very interesting presentation, and yeah, a good insight in the three cities you've presented us and their waste management or lack of and hurdles of waste management. So yeah, thank you very much. There already was a question in the chat that was answered by Marcus, so feel free to use the chat or the discussion time slots we've foreseen after the next presentation, or the impulse which is given by Marcus. Again, you know him already, so no need for introduction. Marcus is going to talk about the lessons learned throughout the Waste Guide project.
So perfect. Thank you very much, Marcel. Thank you very much, Molukin. So before we just go right into the discussion to the actual state of organic waste management in Ethiopia and East African countries, we just wanted to take just a few minutes to reflect a little bit about the topic itself, but also about the perspective of the pilot project, since this was the first time for us within the Prevent Network to just conduct this one-of-a-kind pilot project. And we do had some hurdles, we do had some successes, and we just wanted to let you know. So we start with the challenges actually that we actually had to face. So the first one would be the presence on site and face-to-face communication would definitely be key in Ethiopia and other East African countries. So gladly, we had the luck to have Cifa Onlus with us on board that had the opportunity to just talk with the people on site. But we definitely felt that online meetings do work very well since the Corona pandemic, actually, but we still had some issues with internet connection, or it's not like the same sitting on a table with each other and just talk. So the demand for data acquisition is also still pretty high, actually. So as we heard from Molukin already, especially in the rural areas, we actually don't have any data on waste production or waste generation. And people don't see the demand for actually to have these data. In the cities, it's a little bit different. We do have a little bit of data, but there you can definitely, at least from a scientific point of view, could improve definitely, but at least we there have some sort of accounting for the waste masses and the amounts. Another thing would then be, since I mentioned, we have 6 partners within this project, and we talk to a lot of people within this project. So engaging people at a round table takes a lot of time. That was one very big lesson for us, especially if you want to expand this table with even more people you actually want to involve somehow. So this is something that was definitely stated out within this project. But now to the successes. One thing that we actually wanted to point out, that the collaboration with strong partners and other people involved definitely leads to creative solution and provides a broader picture than just focusing on us. So something like this, something like the Prevent Network, especially, for example, is something really good just to get people involved, just to exchange on some ideas you actually do have, and really get that this is some sort of a platform we actually can talk about these topics, which are not very not in a broad interest, let's state it this way, in the normal everyday life of everybody. So another thing would then be, though we have heard from Molukin that there's still current practices of solid waste management are pretty at risk due to the lack of implementation. Still, the efforts of the government, the local authorities, private companies especially, like the example from Mr. Hancock zum Beispiel, for example, NGOs and the organization of the development collaborations have set a great baseline to get started in organic waste management at least. So we don't start at zero, definitely not, and there's still a lot to go, but there is some sort of a foundation we can actually build on. The next thing would then be when we're talking about guidelines, especially in the second half of this workshop, action to establish successful showcases of treatment and logistic concepts needs to be definitely taken. So involving local actors that are already have built some sort of composting site, for example, that do have some issues with the process management, for example, or the quality of the input streams and output streams. That would be very interesting and the key for a successful implementation. So this was just now brief impulse, Marcel called it, to get the discussion started. So now, if you have any questions to the both presentations you have now seen from me and from Molukin, and also some other ideas to the pilot project, please feel free just to say something. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Markus. So I don't see any questions at the moment in the chat, neither do I see raised hands. So now would be the opportunity to talk to Markus and Molukin on their presentations given on the status quo on current treatment systems. And there already, as I said earlier, there already was one question in the chat from Eric from Uganda. Yeah, who would like to get involved as well. And but I think for Eric, the next part of the workshop is going to be the highly interesting one where we do get into specific treatment and transport concepts. But now there are 2 or 3 raised hands. Cholet, if you like, ask your question.
Good morning. My name is Cholet Ramlal, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much for the insights on what the data that you've collected in Ethiopia. One of my questions is more around, you said that there was a lack of support for separation at source. Was this mainly at the homes where you said there was no space, or was this mainly in the industrial areas or the hospitality area where they were actually the largest contributor to the organic waste?
So yes, I would try to answer your question, and Molukin, if you have anything to add, just feel free.
That question is maybe best answered by Molukin, I guess. But you are still muted now.
Okay, thank you very much. Basically, the problem of this space provision is occurring both way, in both industrial wastes and in household. It was very difficult and a challenge to get a space for separation in type and in kind of wastes. So it's both.
Thank you.
Are you happy with the answer, Cholet?
I understand the challenge. I'm just not sure what was done to try and overcome that, or whether that was in the ambit of the study or it was just around the data collection.
Yeah.
Maybe to add something to this, maybe there were also some actions, for example, in Addis Ababa, where they introduced separation and collection sites within the different districts of the city. But unfortunately, it wasn't accepted that much, since it was very close by the apartments and the houses of the people living there. And unfortunately, these collection and separation sites were poorly managed. So the waste was not in the dump sites where it had to be, but on the streets and everywhere else. And so people didn't really get the idea of the separated collection in this case. So it was more or less a problem of implementation, I would say. There have been some efforts, and there are also some efforts actually, especially in the industry kind of field. So there you can definitely have some sort of sort separation, or at least very pure material flows that you actually can directly make use of. But especially in the household collection, it's pretty difficult. For example, for the door-to-door collection, it is like that people get paid to dump their plastic waste, especially. So the collectors come by, pay you for your plastic waste, and take it with them. With organic waste, this doesn't happen. So it's not that much of an incentive for the people just to separate the organic waste separately.
Well, maybe when you have some time, I've got one of my partners on the call with me here, PO from a company called TerraSafi, where we started community-based organic recycling projects in mainly hospitality areas in Kenya. And maybe that could also, you could also maybe, we could share with you a lot of our lessons, because some of what you talked about with regards to engaging the community is firstly very important, because they need to understand the importance of why they're doing this. But a second component is the actual valorization of the waste. For now, people only associate plastic with having value and not wasteful food. But if you show them that there's the nutrient cycle that needs to be completed, because you mentioned the demand for organic fertilizer, which in East Africa and the company I am from, we work across East Africa. When you look at the fact that East Africa's GDP is still constituted more than 50 to 60% of agriculture, all depending on chemical fertilizer that is imported, there definitely is a gap to create value around compost.
Thank you, Shalai, for the remark, and definitely you should have a talk on this. This sounds very interesting.
Yes, thank you very much, Shalai. Really interesting. There's also a question from Carly. You can go ahead.
Yes, my name is Carly, and I'm the founder of Mama Toto Cloth Diapers in Nairobi, in Kenya. And my question was, we're working hard to kind of turn the tides of moving towards disposable diapers in Kenya and throughout Africa. You see the cost of disposable diapers has decreased significantly in the last 5 to 7 years. And the use of disposable diapers is exponentially growing. And when we talk with some of our major recyclers and the waste management and Nairobi Metropolitan Services and a lot of the people on the coast of Kenya, they say their number one nuisance in terms of recycling and waste collection is these disposable diapers. And every year there's just more and more and more of them coming in, and they don't know what to do with them. There's nothing they can do with them. And so I was just curious as to see, in terms of Ethiopia, if you're finding that to be something difficult and with your waste management systems, and if there's a plan to what to do with this increase, because I'm sure Ethiopia is going to be very closely behind Kenya and the rest of Africa in this increase in use of them.
Yeah, this is actually a question. I'm not quite sure if I can answer it, since we are especially focused on the organic waste management side. But as you stated out, the amounts of waste going to triple around in the next 30 years. So this is definitely a huge problem, since over 90% of this waste is actually dumped on inadequate dump sites somewhere around the country, or mostly commonly very nearby to the apartments and houses of the people, actually. So even in Addis, the dump site is very close to the city. You just can go 10 meters to the next apartments, for example. So this is definitely a huge problem. And if something like the substitution of dispensable diapers could be a solution for this, or a contribution, it would definitely be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that as we are continuing to try and promote this and raise awareness, we're finding that disposable diapers are not really being included in any of the studies in regards to plastics. We find it's just not an area that anybody touches on, and there's just very little research on it. So I think just was curious to see as to what you're seeing in Ethiopia, but also just to raise the flag for people who are doing research to make sure that this is included in there. Because, this is what everybody tells us, the plastic straws, flip-flop plastic bags, the number one thing they want to get rid of is the disposable diapers. And so we would love to have more research around that to help us better understand.
Yes, thank you very much, Carly. Yeah, but I think one problem really is the amount of data available on the waste streams. So yeah, as Marcus said, there probably is no data on diapers specifically, but I think they're a problem everywhere in the world, in Europe as well. So thank you, Carly. And there's a question by Mr. Reichenbach, who's going to present later and is curious now. Mr. Reichenbach.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, yeah, I will presenting later on in the session, but given the opportunity to ask a question, and thanks first for Moluken and Marcus for this very interesting insights and the work done so far in Ethiopia and the research done on the waste management situation there. And Marcus stressed in his presentation the importance to set up and for the continue demonstrations and pilots for best practice application. Moluken in his presentation, for example, mentioned the case of Hawassa, where the composting system has already been started, but is at risk to be abandoned due to problems in the marketing, as I understood. So my question is it foreseen in the continuation of this project or any other initiative to jump exactly into these existing cases and to help overcome the problems and challenges encountered in these projects instead of setting up further examples or new projects, because by experience each of these projects has to go through a learning curve, and I think in terms of sustainability for the investment made in this project, it would be good to help overcoming existing problems in existing projects as well. How is this tackled?
Thank you very much, Mr. Reichenbach. This was actually exactly the thought I had when we've looked into all those existing composting plants, of already biogas plants that are built right now, that do have a lot of issues with especially the processing side, and some issues with as I mentioned, the pureness of the waste streams coming in, for example, where we definitely can do some kind of help. But for now, actually, we don't have any concrete plans to further develop this idea. This was just more or less one finding of the first status quo report, actually, that this is some sort of an challenge that we would actually how you would say it, it would be very interesting just to go in now to build just new pilot plants over the country, everywhere from a completely new perspective, just to involve those people and just to emphasize on the achievements they already have. Since I think especially the example from Hawassa especially is already a pretty good medium-sized composting plant with all the machineries needed for the operation of the plant, and it's going pretty well, but they're still not on 100% capacity actually, and they do have some issues with the composting product at the end of them, so we need to ensure quality control there. So this would be highly interesting actually to go into those projects and just help those people, not to build anything new completely from the ground up. But as I mentioned, at least from our side, there are no plans yet, but we would definitely emphasize on this. This would be a great idea.
So thank you, Mr. Reichenbach. Thank you, Markus, for taking the answer. So far, I can see no more questions or no more raised hands, but there is activity in the chat, which is good. Piotr seems to have a properly managed library and posted some good reads on the topics of today. Thank you for that. So if there are no further questions at the moment, I think we could go on with the next part of today's workshop, which is now going away from the status quo that was presented and is now taking a look into the future and giving the first impulses on possible implementations on waste treatment. And the first speaker of the second part of today's workshop will be Dr. Ulrich Wiege, who's working at ICU, European Environmental Engineers in Berlin, here in Germany. He's an environmental engineer himself and wrote his PhD thesis on composting. So he has the proper expertise for our topic. And also he has a long ongoing experience for about 35 years in planning and developing concepts in the waste treatment industry. And during those 35 years, he worked in many countries far from Germany, amongst others in Egypt, Gambia, and Mozambique. And so, Mr. Wiege, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcel and Markus in the round. Thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, as you see with my gray hairs, I had the chance to observe the whole evolution of waste collection and treatment in Germany, starting in the range of the 80s of the last centuries. And we could make a lot of experience with that, extracting what is successful and, of course, collecting the failures we made, not to repeat them in other occasions. And in Germany, the waste management system is almost perfect. Everybody has a couple of separate collection bins, and the waste treatment is at the positive end. So I'm, from my side, very interested to share my little knowledge with other countries, developing countries, and I'm very glad that I can conduct this this partnership in this project. Is it possible to slip the slides? Yeah. So the item which we are tasked with is the treatment of the collection and treatment of organic waste. As said, they are the hugest share of the whole waste, here estimated following the data with about 70%. And shortly in brief, summarizing what is already known, the best way to treat this organic waste is source separated as bio-waste, because we can find out and get thereby the best compost quality. Additionally, there is a remaining organic share in the remaining waste, and this remaining waste is to be treated to reduce the biological activity, so that after the treatment, this biological activity cannot cause damages on the later landfill material. And the last point, of course, is the worst, the untreated dump siting. You see the proportions, yeah, the organic is very high, and the recyclable share is much lower than, for example, in Germany. That is due to the lower consumption rate of anything. If you have more money, as in Germany, you can buy more things, which we will later waste. And the less money you have, it sounds a bit cynical, the less you can buy, and the smaller is especially the share of recyclables. Okay, when we go to the damages, to the damages coming out from the organic material being dump sited, we all know that these are health and explosion risks, groundwater contamination, landslips, emission of greenhouse gases, and so on and so forth. Just to extract one of these endangering effects is in the graphics below. If we put the organic in the landfill, we will produce about 1 ton of CO2 equivalent in terms of methane. And as written in the last sentence, anything else, what we do with the organic waste is far better than landfilling. In this case, reducing the greenhouse gas emission by the alternatives like there are composting, anaerobic digestion, and incineration, which are item of the upcoming report of INTECUS. Okay, next slide, please. The experience I made, which are valid all over the world, of course, develop an adapted technical and operational concept adapted to the local conditions, enable citizens to suffer by the recent status. As Mulukan says, I noted that the waste management is not a felt issue. And this is very important to recognize that. We are all aware that there is an objective problem with the waste, the recent treatment. But to transport that in realization, we need a majority of the population to participate not only in paying more for the waste management, but as well as participating in separate collection, for example. And to win them for them needs that we have to place some better options to create a desire for it, because this is the main kind of motivation. Waste management is a stepwise evolutionary process following the local economic conditions. We all see we have a certain budget of money we can spend for this item. These are the economic frame conditions. And we must start with small, we should start with small model projects to continue in these steps of evolution. And these first methods should be payable and acceptable. Thereby we collect experience and raise awareness. That's the same procedure as we did in Germany, small model projects for separate collection in the 18th. First model project to treat the remaining waste, look at how they work, then continue. And I think that is the way, the stepwise way to find a good proceeding in the solutions. So, by coming to the next steps, the next slide, please. Now, thank you for listening to my introducing speech. Now, I hand over to the specialists. The first contribution is of Rodiek, which made the research how to collect and transport the waste by the experience systems, and then the report of INTECUS, Jan Reichenbach, the treatment opment for the organic waste, as well the separate collected organic waste as the mixed waste remaining. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wiegel, for the introduction to the actual implementation part of this workshop. Very interesting. Thank you. And now it gets more specific on waste collection and logistical concepts. And the presentation for Rodiek is given by Leon Jäger, who says about himself that he is interested in waste management and recycling since high school. He made something meaningful out of it. He studied environmental engineering. I'm under the impression now that we have an environmental engineering conference today. I think he's the third in a row. Leon studied in Bremen and Cape Town, is passionate about the African continent, traveled to more than 10 countries and lived in 2 of them. Maybe he goes into detail on which countries those were. And at his current employer, the Rodiek company, he's responsible for consulting and project development in the international context. So, Leon, we're excited about your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Marcel. I'm also very excited to present our input to the waste guideline. Our input was on waste collection and logistical concepts. Yes, next slide, please. I will give you an overview on what I'm going to present today. Our task was to make recommendations for logistical concepts depending on the settlement structure. And so my presentation will follow basically the process that we took in developing these recommendations. So I will start with an introduction of our company, give you some key principles for solid waste management solutions that we considered in our development process, highlight the elements of collection systems, which definitely are important in this process. And I will also explain the interrelations between collection and treatment and how they make up like a system as a whole. And then I will focus on the collection mode. And then finally, I will give the recommendations for the logistical concepts on the settlement structures, focusing on metropolitan areas, semi-urban to urban areas, and rural areas. And I will finish my presentation with some short conclusions and recommendations. Next slide, please. All right, Rodiek is a German consulting company in the field of waste management and recycling. Our mission is to support the development of a functioning circular economy by providing experience and operational know-how. We do this because we are part of Nielsen Group, one of the largest operational waste management service and recycling providers. And so we have in all these different fields of the value chain operational access to operational experience that we sort of transfer to our partners in low and middle income countries. We can cover the whole value chain from collection over sorting, treatment, all the way to recycling. We provide project management, trainings, consulting on equipment, give operational support and consulting for pretty much any question that might come up during the operation of a waste management or recycling business. And on the left side in the map, you can see some of our recent project activities. Next slide, please. So some key principles on solid waste management solutions that we had to consider while developing our input to the waste guideline. We had to make sure that the selected technologies work reliably under the local conditions. We had to make sure that all transport costs are minimized, as transport costs typically make up the largest part of the overall system costs. It is important to meet the needs and expectations of the local population in order to get their acceptance of the newly designed waste management system. It is important to recover the overall cost, both OPEX and CAPEX. This can be done either through a waste fee or through the sale of the treatment products. And while doing this, you typically face a trade-off between having minimal transport costs and having a maximum of quality of the treatment products. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution to this trade-off. It needs to be solved in the individual context and the local needs. Next slide. Here are some of the key elements of a collection system and all the aspects that are considered when trying to design an effective collecting system. So you need to consider the waste quantities and qualities. You need to determine the status quo that you're facing and deeply research the local needs and expectations of their expectations towards a new waste management and collection system. And also see how the system interacts with the informal sector. You need to check the waste generation and the composition. You need to consider the population density. This is a key factor in designing the overall logistics. And you need to eventually determine what fractions you want to collect and also what quantities you are expecting. When looking at the collection system, you need to determine distances that are reasonable for vehicles to drive or also for people to walk. You need to determine how you actually want to collect and how often. You need to determine the most suitable combination between containers and vehicles. And you also need to determine if and how to collaborate with the informal sector versus a formal working system. Then you need to look at the treatment capacities, determine what is already there and what might be needed. And you need to determine what treatment processes you want to select for the purpose you're achieving. You need to look at the transport capacities. Also here you need to analyze what is already there, what might need to be upgraded, and also how many vehicles you need to perform these tasks. And also bearing in mind that you need some spare vehicles, maybe if some vehicles are currently under repair or maintenance. And then another key aspect is the personnel, and you need to determine what qualifications the staff needs, and also how many people you need working in your system. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to highlight the trade-off between the system costs and product quality. When you collect source-separated material, you typically achieve a higher quality of the treatment products. Dr. Wiegel already mentioned that. On the other side, you typically receive higher logistics costs, and you need to expect your waste generators to be more involved in the system. On the other hand, you achieve lower treatment and disposal costs because less material is sorted out and has to be landfilled. And when you collect mixed material, you basically have the opposite situation. And so my takeaway from all of this is you cannot look at the logistics and the treatment separately, but rather see how you see them as a system. Can you go to the next slide? Then it's already written there. You need to focus on how to integrate them into an effective system as a whole. Next slide. All right, I already mentioned the benefits of source-separated organic waste material. When you try to establish separate collection of organic waste from the households, it's a long process. You need a lot of time and a lot of effort to implement this, and it cannot be done overnight. But you can still enjoy some of the benefits that are mentioned by focusing on large organic waste streams from sources that already have fairly homogeneous organic composition. And as such, these are, for example, municipal garden maintenance, markets, food wholesalers and retailers, the food processing industry, restaurants and hotels, and sometimes even certain agricultures, if they do not recycle their waste on site. And so, next slide, please. These are some sort of a low-hanging fruit that can be focused on. Can you go back quickly? That you can focus on in order to already establish a running system and then gradually wait for the separate collection from households to be implemented. Next slide. So now that I've given you some background on the considerations that we took that all went into the development of our recommendations, I would like to present you our recommendations for different settlement structures. And I'm going to start with the metropolitan areas. And here we try to optimize the logistics by using bulk transport, looking at the collection times, and focusing on decentral treatment. So as I mentioned, there's a separate collection from the commercial sources. As I mentioned, the large waste streams of fairly homogeneous composition, the low-hanging fruits, they can be collected directly from their point of generation and then just moved to the treatment site. And at the same time, there's going to be a separate collection on the household level. The households will collect their organics and also their residues in color-coded transparent plastic bags, which are then collected right from the curbside every other day during the day. And this first stage collection can be done by micro enterprises or even informal waste pickers. And these have the important function of communicating with the households and also checking the quality. Through the transparent plastic bags, they can see any impurities, anything that has not been sorted properly. And then while picking it up, they can directly confront the households and say, please do it better next time. And they also have the chance, if there are any recyclables visible in the bags, they can take them out and use them for their own processes. The material is then transferred via ramp transfer into containers for the second transport stage. For the second transport stage, we selected a roll-off containers and roll-off tippers. As they have a huge volume, the vehicles are fairly cheap and fairly easy to maintain. And the containers are robust and can be placed in various locations in the city. They're picked up during the night in order to avoid any traffic congestions, heavy traffic, other delays that might come up during the day. And they can go much quicker to their final destination site. As the final destination site, we decided we want to have decentralized treatment facilities. This is especially useful in large metropolitan areas where you have long distances or where you could have long distances if you want to deliver everything to one central treatment site. And so it makes sense to have multiple spread over the city to also have the chance for more specific treatment processes and also trying to optimize the distance that you're traveling. In this system, the operative costs should be recovered through a waste fee. And what is useful about the plastic bags that I mentioned in the beginning, they can be given out as a prepaid system. And so each bag basically costs the amount of what the treatment and logistics and disposal of this type of fraction costs. And the whole system can be co-financed through selling the treatment products as well. Next slide, please. I'm coming to the semi-urban to urban areas. There we focused on establishing managed transfer sites to establish reliable quality control, the collection of costs, and also to establish on-demand logistics. In these areas, we still have a separate collection from the commercial sources. They're picked up directly and directly brought to a treatment site. The household waste is also separated. And then the residues and the organic waste and maybe even some recyclables are brought to the managed community container sites. There we have multiple containers, and we have workers who support the population to throw their bags or the waste in the respective containers. They have the function of checking if everything is sorted properly, and are this sort of communication step in the system. And they can collect a fee based on a pay-as-you-throw system. And they also have an eye on the fill level of the containers and schedule with the logistics providers. They schedule a pickup once the containers are full, thus optimizing the utilization of the vehicle capacity and sort of establishing this on-demand logistics system. In this case, we decided to use skip containers, which are a bit smaller than the roll-off containers, reducing the footprint and also reducing the space requirements of the container sites. And in the semi-urban to urban areas, we decided for one central treatment site, because in these smaller cities, you don't have that long distances and that much trouble with the traffic, and you can. It's justifiable to go to just one central treatment site, which is larger and optimized, has an optimized capacity, and it should be located close to the landfill in order to have short distances for transporting the sorting residues and other things. As I said, there's going to be a pay-as-you-throw fee when the households bring their waste into the containers, and there's also going to be co-financing through the treatment products. Next slide. All right, for the rural areas, we took a completely different approach. We decided on community composting on a neighborhood level, thus completely avoiding any formal logistics that is needed. So there's going to be low-tech, maybe even manual composting sites on a block or street level in a community. And the material from both the households and nearby businesses is delivered straight there and treated. And there's only going to be small exceptions when larger amounts need to be transported with a vehicle, but usually it's justifiable to bring the waste over such a short distance to the facility. And the compost generated this way can be used within the community, or it can be distributed amongst the community members and used for whatever purpose they have for the compost. For this system, we considered rural areas which have a very low waste generation rate and also a very high organic content of far over 90%. All right, next slide, please. So I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I would like to give you some recommendations that we developed through our guideline. As I said, separate collection from households requires a significant effort from the waste generators, from the service providers, and also from the authorities. And you cannot expect to achieve this overnight. And therefore, it makes sense to start with the low-hanging fruit, easily accessible, large, fairly homogeneous organic waste streams from commercial sources or institutional sources. And while already this is being collected and treated, you can work on establishing the collection from the households. We would recommend to start with small-scale, low-tech pilots, and as I said, focus on these large sources with homogeneous composition. If you want to achieve high-quality output materials, I think this has been mentioned already during this day, but it is very important to have material that is separated at source and kept separate over all transport stages. And if you want to have your system widely accepted in the population, you need to involve all stakeholders during all stages of planning and implementation. Next slide, please. All right, so that was it already from my side. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and sort of followed the process that we had while designing our part of the waste guideline. If you have any questions or further need for discussion, we can do it just now or afterwards or even in a special call at some other time. Thank you very much.